Hello, my name is Daniel, and welcome to Sleepy Time History. Today's Sleep History covers the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge stands as one of the most significant and harrowing engagements of World War II. Fought from December 16th, 1944 to January 25th, 1945, in the dense forests of the Ardennes region, it was Adolf Hitler's final major offensive on the Western Front. This battle not only tested the resolve of the Allied forces, but also marked a turning point in the war in Europe. By the late autumn of 1944, World War II in Europe appeared to be nearing its conclusion. The Allied forces had swept through France, liberated Paris, and stood at the borders of Germany itself. The German Wehrmacht had been driven back on nearly every front. Yet despite these setbacks, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi High Command were not ready to surrender. Instead, Hitler conceived one final, desperate gamble, an all-out surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest. The plan was audacious. He believed that if he could drive a wedge between American and British forces, encircle and destroy large segments of the Allied armies, and seize the crucial port of Antwerp, he could force the Western Allies to negotiate a peace settlement. This would allow Nazi Germany to redirect its remaining strength to the Eastern Front, where Soviet forces were pressing hard from the other side. It was a long shot, but Hitler saw it as his last hope. Codenamed Operation Wacht am Rhein, or Watch on the Rhine, the German plan relied on speed, secrecy, and weather. The goal was to push west through the Ardennes, a rugged forested area spanning parts of Belgium and Luxembourg, then cross the Meuse River and seize Antwerp within 10 days. To accomplish this, Hitler committed over 200,000 soldiers, 1,000 tanks, including the feared Tiger and Panther models, more than 1,800 artillery pieces, and a supporting air force of over 1,000 aircraft. It would be Germany's largest offensive on the Western Front since the invasion of France in 1940. But time was short. Fuel reserves were running dangerously low. The German economy was stretched to its breaking point. Success depended entirely on surprise. Why the Ardennes? The choice of the Ardennes was not accidental. It was a region considered by the Allies to be a quiet sector. Its dense forests and narrow roads were thought to be unsuitable for a large-scale mechanized assault. It was the same route the Germans had used successfully in 1940, and Hitler believed lightning could strike twice. Moreover, the sector was thinly defended. American divisions stationed in the Ardennes were under strength, fatigued, or newly arrived and inexperienced. These troops were intended to rest and refit before returning to heavier action. This made them a perfect target. The intelligence blind spot. Despite clear indicators of a German build-up, Allied intelligence was caught completely off guard. The ultra-secretive, ultra-code-breaking operation had gone quiet. The Germans had reverted to landline communications, making it harder for British and American cryptanalysts to intercept messages. In addition, a false sense of security had taken hold. Many Allied commanders believed that Germany no longer had the strength for a major offensive. They underestimated the desperation and the cunning of the German High Command. Even when reports came in of increased German troop movements and strange activity along the Siegfried Line, these were often dismissed or explained away. The calm before the storm. In the early days of December 1944, snow began to fall across the Ardennes. A bitter winter settled over the hills and valleys. For many American GIs, it was the coldest they had ever experienced. Frostbite cases soared. Rations were thin. Equipment froze. Machine guns had to be wrapped in blankets to keep them functional. Tanks became immobilized in icy tracks. But beneath the frozen quiet, something massive was stirring. German tanks and infantry were quietly moving into their assault positions, mostly at night. Troops were ordered to avoid all fires, noise, and lights. By the early morning of December 16th, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers stood poised to strike. The initial assault, the Ardennes erupts. At precisely 5:30 a.m. on December 16th, 1944, the silence of the forest was shattered. A massive German artillery barrage opened fire along an 80-mile front. Shells screamed overhead, crashing into American positions with thunderous force. It was the largest artillery bombardment the Western Front had seen since D-Day. Then came the infantry. Thousands of German soldiers, many dressed in white camouflage, surged through the forest, attacking lightly defended American outposts. In some areas, German tanks plowed through villages, crushing resistance and scattering defenders. Roads quickly became jammed with retreating American convoys, supply trucks, and bewildered rear echelon troops. Chaos on the front. The initial American response was confusion. Phone lines went dead. Unit commanders scrambled for information. Many thought it was just another small German probing attack. But as daylight broke and the scale of the attack became apparent, panic spread. German armored columns poured through gaps in the thin American lines, capturing towns, crossroads, and fuel depots. Units like the 106th Infantry Division, which had just arrived in the sector days before, were overwhelmed. Entire regiments were encircled and forced to surrender. The fog of war, and real fog too. The Germans had timed the offensive perfectly. Thick fog and low-hanging clouds blanketed the battlefield. This grounded the Allied air forces, nullifying their critical air superiority. Without eyes in the sky, Allied commanders had no clear picture of the battlefield. German special operations units, dressed in American uniforms, infiltrated Allied lines, redirecting traffic, cutting wires, and spreading misinformation. It was psychological warfare at its most cunning. Within 48 hours, the German advance had created a massive dent in the Allied front lines. This bulge gave the battle its name. But while the Germans had achieved tactical surprise and territorial gains, they had not broken the Allied spirit. All across the Ardennes, pockets of American troops began to dig in, hold crossroads, delay convoys, and fight with stubborn tenacity. Small unit actions, many fought in isolation, would play a crucial role in slowing the German timetable. The Battle of the Bulge had begun with fire and fury, smoke and snow. Hitler had rolled the dice in one last desperate move. He had taken the Allies by surprise, but not broken them. In the days ahead, American forces would regroup. They would hold critical towns like Bastogne, and eventually they would push the Germans back. The Siege of Bastogne, a story of courage, cold, and defiance. Of all the fierce engagements during the Battle of the Bulge, none captured the spirit of defiance and endurance more than the Siege of Bastogne. This small Belgian town, became the center of a brutal confrontation that tested the limits of human resilience and military strategy. What unfolded in Bastogne in December of 1944 was not just a tactical standoff, it was a symbol of Allied resolve. Bastogne was not chosen by chance. This modest town, surrounded by the Ardennes forest, held a position of immense strategic value. 7 major roads converged at Bastogne, making it a logistical prize. For the German plan, codenamed Operation Wacht am Rhein, to succeed, they had to seize Bastogne early, control the roads, and continue pushing northwest to capture Antwerp. The town was lightly defended when the Germans launched their surprise offensive. But American High Command quickly recognized the threat and moved to reinforce it. In a matter of days, elements of the 101st Airborne Division, the 10th Armored Division, and other supporting units were rushed in by truck convoys under frigid, foggy skies. The encirclement begins. By December 20th, just 4 days after the German offensive began, Bastogne was completely surrounded. German panzer divisions had closed off all roads in and out of the town. The siege had begun. Inside the town, nearly 18,000 American troops braced for what would become a harrowing ordeal. The weather was merciless. Temperatures plunged below freezing. Snow blanketed the ground, turning the forest into a white, silent graveyard. Visibility was poor. Medical supplies ran dangerously low. Troops suffered not only from wounds, but also from frostbite, trench foot, and hunger. Yet morale, incredibly, held firm. The men of the 101st Airborne, many of them veterans from D-Day and Operation Market Garden, dug in and fortified positions throughout the town. They established roadblocks, built makeshift bunkers, and repurposed civilian buildings as aid stations and command posts. On December 22nd, German forces offered the Americans a chance to surrender. 2 German officers approached the lines under a flag of truce. They presented a formal message to Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne. It was clear: surrender or face complete destruction. McAuliffe's famous response was simple, bold, and immortal. To the German commander, nuts, the American commander. The reply confused the German couriers, who needed it translated. Once they understood, the answer sent a clear message: the Americans were not backing down. Life inside Bastogne became a grueling routine of freezing nights, constant artillery shelling, and close-quarters fighting. Soldiers slept in foxholes and basements, clutching their rifles to stay warm. Supplies were critically low. Ammunition was rationed. Food came in small, cold portions, when it came at all. The field hospital, located in a dank cellar, was overcrowded and under-resourced. Doctors worked by flashlight, performing surgeries with limited morphine and no proper heating. Despite the odds, the American soldiers held strong defensive positions. Every road leading into the town became a choke point. Machine gun nests, tank destroyers, and mortar teams ensured the Germans paid dearly for every inch they tried to take. The turning point in the siege came with the weather. In late December, the skies finally cleared. With the fog and clouds lifting, Allied aircraft could once again take to the skies. Transport planes dropped medical supplies, food, blankets, and ammunition. Fighter bombers and P-47 Thunderbolts strafed German columns, destroyed artillery positions, and disrupted their supply lines. The Luftwaffe, though still a threat, was no match for the rejuvenated Allied air power. To the men inside Bastogne, the roar of Allied planes overhead was a divine sound. It meant they were not forgotten. Patton's race to Bastogne. Even as the siege raged, help was on the way. General George S. Patton, commanding the U.S. Third Army, had already anticipated the German move and executed a daring pivot northward. In just 48 hours, he redirected 3 divisions toward Bastogne, an extraordinary maneuver in the snowbound terrain. On December 26th, Patton's lead elements, spearheaded by the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, broke through German lines and reached the outskirts of Bastogne. They fought tooth and nail through German resistance, but by that afternoon they had linked up with the beleaguered defenders. The siege was lifted. The men of Bastogne were no longer alone. After the siege, a costly stand, though the encirclement had been broken, fighting in and around Bastogne continued for weeks. The town lay in ruins. Smoke drifted from shattered buildings. Shell craters scarred the roads. But the Allies had held. American forces had paid a steep price, over 3,000 casualties during the siege. But their defense had bought the Allies time to regroup, time to blunt the German advance. The siege of Bastogne remains one of the most iconic chapters in American military history. It showcased leadership, improvisation, and the indomitable will to fight in the face of overwhelming odds. Every foxhole, every snow-covered field, every frozen night spent under fire became part of a legend. The name Bastogne now carries with it a legacy of grit, sacrifice, and honor. Today, memorials stand where the soldiers once dug in. Veterans return to see the land they fought for, and history remembers not just a siege, but the unbreakable spirit of those who endured it. This was the siege of Bastogne, a battle inside a battle, an ordeal of ice and fire, defiance and survival. As you reflect on this story, remember the ordinary men who did the extraordinary and held the line when the world was watching. Bastogne's strategic location at the crossroads of several major roads made it a critical point to hold. Despite being encircled and facing dire shortages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies, the defenders held firm. The weather, which had initially favored the Germans, began to clear, allowing Allied aircraft to provide much-needed air support and supply drops. On December 26th, General George S. Patton's Third Army launched a counter-offensive, breaking through the German lines and relieving the besieged town. This victory was a significant morale booster for the Allies and marked a turning point in the battle. The turning tide. By the end of December 1944, the German advance had begun to slow. The initial surprise that had fueled Operation Wacht am Rhein was beginning to fade. The bitter winter, the stubborn resistance of the Americans, and the sheer logistical complexity of sustaining such a large-scale offensive through snow-covered forest roads were starting to take their toll. The Germans had made their Bulge, yes, but they had not broken through. And now it was time for the Allies to strike back. From the very beginning, the German plan had been built on fragile assumptions. One of the biggest was fuel. German tanks and trucks were running low. Their supply lines were overextended. The fast pace of the initial assault had relied on capturing Allied fuel depots, something they largely failed to do. American troops, aware of this weakness, began destroying their own fuel reserves ahead of retreat to keep them out of enemy hands. Without gasoline, the vaunted German panzer divisions became little more than heavily armored bunkers on treads, and as the fog began to lift, so did the Germans' chances. Allied air power returns. By December 24th, the weather broke. Clear skies returned over the Ardennes, and with that came the full force of Allied air superiority. P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, and British Typhoons screamed through the skies, strafing German columns, bombing bridges, attacking convoys, and devastating German supply lines. Transport aircraft, including the legendary C-47 Skytrain, dropped food, ammunition, and medical supplies to surrounded American forces, most crucially to Bastogne. The clear skies turned the tide of the battle in favor of the Allies, not just by enabling reinforcements, but by removing one of the key advantages that had allowed the German offensive to succeed in the first place: concealment. Patton's counteroffensive. At the center of the Allied counterattack was a man known for his aggression and audacity, General George S. Patton. As early as December 19th, Patton had already begun pivoting his Third Army north. In an extraordinary logistical achievement, Patton moved 3 full divisions through treacherous, icy roads in under 48 hours. On December 26th, his forces broke through German lines and relieved the 101st Airborne in Bastogne. But Patton wasn't done. As the days went on, the Third Army pushed aggressively against the southern shoulder of the German salient. His troops advanced through snowstorms, cleared towns, repelled counterattacks, and cut off German units attempting to withdraw. On the northern front, British and American coordination. To the north of the Bulge, American First Army units, reinforced by British XXX Corps under Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, launched a series of coordinated attacks to pinch off the German advance from the top. Though delayed by disagreements between commanders and the harsh terrain, these attacks gained momentum by early January. While the southern pincer was led by Patton, the northern pincer saw fierce resistance, particularly near towns like La Roche-en-Ardenne and Houffalize. Eventually, both pincers converged, effectively sealing the fate of the German advance. The German withdrawal. By mid-January, the German forces were in retreat. Many units that had pushed far into Allied territory were now cut off or surrounded. The elite Waffen-SS panzer divisions, once feared for their mobility and strength, were now bogged down and being hunted by Allied air and artillery. Desperate to escape, German commanders ordered retreats under cover of darkness, abandoning vehicles, weapons, and even wounded comrades. The offensive had failed. Germany had spent its last reserves of fuel, manpower, and strategic initiative. The cost of the battle. By January 25, 1945, the Bulge had been erased from the map, but the cost was staggering. The United States suffered more than 89,000 casualties in the Ardennes, making the Battle of the Bulge the bloodiest battle fought by American forces during the entire war. Germany lost between 67,000 and 100,000 men, along with irreplaceable tanks, aircraft, and weapons. The Luftwaffe, already weakened, was gutted during the battle, and the Wehrmacht, once the pride of Germany, would never again launch an offensive of this scale. Strategic consequences. While the Germans had hoped the Battle of the Bulge would buy them time or force a political negotiation, the opposite occurred. The failure of the offensive only strengthened Allied resolve. The Soviet Red Army launched its own massive offensive from the east on January 12th, taking advantage of the weakened German front. By spring, Allied forces would cross the Rhine, liberate more of Western Europe, and close in on Berlin. The aftermath. The Battle of the Bulge was the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the United States during World War II. American casualties were staggering, with over 80,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. German losses were also significant, with estimates ranging from 67,000 to 125,000. Despite the heavy toll, the battle marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The failure of the German offensive depleted their resources and morale, hastening their defeat. The Allies continued their advance into Germany, and on May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered, bringing an end to the war in Europe. The Battle of the Bulge remains a testament to the courage, resilience, and determination of the soldiers who fought there. It serves as a reminder of the sacrifices made in the pursuit of freedom and the high cost of war. The bravery displayed in the face of overwhelming odds continues to inspire generations. Thank you for joining me in revisiting this crucial chapter of history. If you found this narration insightful, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing for more historical content. Your support helps keep the stories of our past alive.